Well, it doesn't take a genius at this point to realize that I've been watching a lot of First Man and a lot of Hamza. I've really been wrestling with the ideas that they've been bringing to the table, and this one has definitely stuck out to me. The idea that 90% of men are unattractive. I'm not even sure if this is true, but it instinctively feels true. And I can say this because in so many of the books I've read, not just about like relationships, but about business and like creative success as well, it's only the people at the top of any industry who make all the money, who get all of the success. You know, it's only the top 1% of actors who make the big bucks, who are in movies that people watch. All of the money, all of the success, all of the returns on investment lie at being at the top. And so a great use of our time as men is to figure out what industries, what terrains, what disciplines we can rise to the top in. It's very possible to put yourself in a position where you can stand out. And if you can get yourself in that terrain of life, then doors start opening up for you. And one of the reasons I believe it's possible for anyone to reasonably climb to like 2 standard deviations above the norm to be in like the top 10 or 20% is because of statistics. In college, one of the first classes I took was multivariable calculus and later statistics. And an important section that I learned in both of those classes that meant a lot to me is in one of like the word problems I was doing. There was a true story of a man who was diagnosed with cancer when he was 30 years old. And there was a stats page on what the life expectancy was for someone in his position. It's like only 10% of people live 10 years or more. Only 5% of people live 20 years or more. Only 1% of people live like 25 or 30 years, like they actually have like a full life ahead of them. And that young man in that word problem decided that he was going to do everything possible to put himself in the 1% of patients who did have a life expectancy of over 20 years, despite the diagnosis. Now, the example of that cancer patient is very dramatic, but it does point to the idea that even though we're all susceptible to certain trends, patterns, we all potentially should be average, the standard deviation of things does not have to be our result. In this video, I want to explicate this idea of how 90% of men potentially are unattractive. And on the flip side of that, the things we all could be doing to put ourselves in the top 10%, where all of the results would come. So the first reason that 90% of all men are unattractive, and one of the fastest ways that you could stand out as an individual, is to exercise. It doesn't take a genius to know that a great physique is appealing, it's attractive, not only in a romantic context, but there have even been studies that point to the fact that having a muscular physique is very helpful in sales. In fact, when I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography back in the day, he had a whole section where he talked about how he and Franco, his lifting partner, were both really good at selling. Whenever they had like jobs like working at an electronic shop or something, they actually did a great job of selling, and he believed part of that was his muscular physique. It just shows that there's discipline on your frame. You can't fake having a good body. However, most men don't exercise. The average percentage of the US population participating in sports, exercise, and recreation is around 24.2%. This was documented in 2020 based off of a number of phone calls that people would make and like basically ask the public about their exercise regimen. Now, I know this is a thing that I've been harping on the channel and on the podcast quite a bit the last several months. I didn't know how far and how much the gym could take you, how much it could change your life.
Yeah.
And honestly, I feel like a little bit of a phony talking about this because straight up, I've only been taking lifting and exercising seriously for 8 months now. But I will say in a mere 8 months, it has dramatically changed many aspects of my lifestyle habits, the way I look at food. Honestly, it's dramatically changed my face. I used to have a way fatter face, and I would deliberately shoot on really wide millimeters, like this wide, so that my face didn't look fat. And these days, I don't really mind getting crazy tight because in a mere 8 months, I do feel much more confident with my appearance. I like the way I look a lot more than I used to. And even though this is definitely like a vanity metric, it has enormous cascading benefits throughout every aspect of life. Now, going back to that survey which said that only 24.2% of men exercise, really what they found is that only 8.9% do weightlifting. The most common forms of exercise by a very large margin is walking. So the results of those surveys were very much skewed by the fact that there's just a lot of people who are out going for walks. And of course, going for walks is great. Nothing wrong with going for a walk, but it definitely isn't like the kind of strenuous activity that would yield impressive results. Walking does not provide the necessary stimulus to like create hypertrophy and build muscle. So on the opposite end of that, if you were to simply incorporate like heavy exercise, hard training into your lifestyle, and for me this looks like 4 days a week of strength training and a few days a week of cardio, including running, sprints, and boxing sessions, you'd probably put yourself, at least in that category of life, in the top 10% at least, because you're straining. Now, there are debates on what program of lifting is best, especially for someone starting out. But I fall under the camp of saying that you should focus on the compound lifts, the main compound lifts. They are the fastest, most potent way to build up a masculine frame, and the majority of men don't do this. In fact, I would argue that that statistic of saying 8.9% of men lift is overreaching. I have no doubt that the majority of men who are like simply doing bicep curls, they're not necessarily on a program, and they're not really aggressively trying to go for progressive overload, increase their strength. And in terms of the class of men who actually exercise for strength gains, keep track of a progressive overload plan, I would imagine it's probably more like 1%. So this is to say, if you got to lifting and you prioritize nutrition, following a good program, maybe getting a coach if you can afford it, you would radically catapult to the top 1% of men, at least in the department of health and fitness. And health and fitness, like, that is no small thing.
I was like, screw it, let's deadlift max.
As I sort of hinted earlier, there was a time about a year and a half ago where I felt my health was sort of slipping away from me. I guess this is because as a younger man, I have always had a very lean face and like a super sharp jawline as a younger guy, and I didn't really have to work for it after I was 18 years old. Even though I always exercised, but I never really watched what I ate so much. And finally, once I got into my mid and later 20s, some of the bad habits I got sort of got away from me. And after 2 years of drinking semi-regularly during like social engagements and allowing myself to eat junk food pretty regularly, like semi-regularly, it got away from me a little bit. For a while there, I didn't look quite as sharp as I had been used to looking as a younger guy. My face had gotten less lean and defined. I could feel my stomach jutting out just slightly, which is why back in those days I would wear a lot of button-down shirts. And this is a bit embarrassing to admit, but I remember there was a time where I would look at older photos of me, like back when I was 22, and wishing I looked like that again, which is a terrible feeling. But after these 8 months of taking my training seriously, that nostalgia for the way I used to look has largely gone away. I think I might be approaching some amount of my prime, even though I'm not as young and bright-faced as I used to be. But I feel more confident in my skin. I'm proud of the progress I've made with fitness, even though I do have a long way to go. And so it makes me think that the title of this video probably is true. Like 90% of men, if they're not working hard with their fitness, they're probably unattractive. And this is such a easy, low-hanging fruit to catapult yourself in a place where you can be a presence. Basically, 90% of men are unattractive.
Correct.
You feel the truth of that in your body.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually the start.
The second reason 90% of men are unattractive is because of a lack of deep work. What is deep work? It is work that is meaningful. It is work that is done with depth and rigor. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American works around 8.8 hours a day if they have a full-time day job. But of those 8 hours, only about 3 or 4 hours are like actual work. A study of nearly 2,000 full-time office workers revealed that most people aren't working for most of the time they're at work. The most popular unproductive activities listed were reading news websites for an hour a day, checking social media up to 45 minutes a day, discussing non-work related things with coworkers for 40 minutes, searching for new jobs for 26 minutes, I'm definitely guilty of this, and taking smoke breaks. Now, this is partially because an actual 8-hour workday, like getting yourself to do 8 hours of meaningful work, it might be unsustainable for most people. The research suggests that if you're productive for just 3 hours a day, you're outputting the same amount as someone in the office for 8 hours. This tells us a few things. If you could get yourself to do deep work for just a handful of hours a day, your productivity would be far above many men. And at least the conclusion we came to on one of our podcast episodes, competence, mastery, working on a craft, it's a huge part of what makes a man attractive. So if you can get yourself to do a few hours of deep work every day, I personally aim for just 3 hours of needle moving deep work every day, which is actually, it sounds pathetic, but it's actually quite hard to do on a daily basis. Do 3 to 4 hours of work.
Yep.
It's like such a basic thing to say.
But like focused work on a skill that you know, like be deliberate about it.
The key to making deep work a part of your life is consistency. The author Neil Stephenson had written an essay called Why I Am a Bad Correspondent, in which he had said, if I organize my life in such a way that I get lots of long, consecutive, uninterrupted time chunks, I can write novels. But as those chunks get separated and fragmented, my productivity as a novelist drops spectacularly. And so regardless of where you are right now, if you were to make a commitment to doing 3 to 4 hours of uninterrupted, hard, deep work, maybe you could try the Pomodoro method and take the occasional break every 30 or 60 minutes. But if you were to give yourself 3-hour chunks day in and day out to make progress on the most important objectives you're working towards, it would not take long for you to get like in the top 10%. The third idea that I came up with is to take your foot off the things that kill courage. A man who isn't on some purpose, working towards some ambition, really just feels empty inside. It's a very sinking feeling. But society today has a lot of distractions, very tempting distractions that can kill that anxiety that kicks in when you're not on your purpose. Even now, I get anxiety much more, like not true anxiety, but like this feeling of dread when I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It doesn't take long for it to kick in, and ever since I became self-employed, that feeling kicks in so much more rapidly, which has actually been a blessing. I can't do as much to, maybe blame my boss on why I haven't been taking the right actions, why I haven't been acting more boldly and courageously towards the objectives, the career moves that I'm trying to make. And honestly, I would argue it's our dread, it's our demons that give us some amount of courage. In many ways, happiness is not the goal. Happiness is maybe like a byproduct of what happens when you just happen to take the act of courage. Taking acts of courage, working boldly towards certain objectives, it's terrifying, but it feels great once you've moved towards it, even if you fail. And in order to get rid of the dread that happens when you know you should be doing something and you're not doing it, you could do one of two things. You could just do the damn thing, which is what people had to do back in the day. They had to storm the beaches of Normandy because there was no other choice. Or the way it looks today, you could potentially distract yourself. And sometimes distractions are insidious because they look like work. You could distract yourself with video games, alcohol, pornography, pointless online dating. These are all great for numbing you to the acts of courage you need to be taking to get better.
God, I can't get anywhere. Fuck!
That being said, I do believe in inspired leisure, and I have been on the search for a new show that could kind of motivate me. Up until now, Peaky Blinders has been that show that has inspired me to take courageous action the most. But I recently started the show How to Make It in America. It's like this 2010s HBO TV series, and there's a moment that happened in the second episode of the show that really floored me. Basically, these two friends want to be designers, fashion designers, and they're trying to start their own denim line. They end up at a party where John Varvatos, the famous designer, is there, and they get their friend to introduce themselves to him. And even though John says, yeah, nice to meet you guys, would you like to join us at the end of the table? They don't really have a chance to talk to John Varvatos and leave an impression or create an actual contact with him. And so one friend is looking at the other and he says, do you think we should just call it quits? Should we just leave this party? And the other says, I gotta do something. I can't leave this party without creating a sense of connection with this guy, with this huge designer. So what he does is stand up in the middle of this table and he says, I gotta make a toast. Hey everyone, if you could just listen to me, I gotta make a toast. I want to thank John for being such an amazing host and for throwing such a wonderful party here. He's the man. Here's to John. Even though he didn't really know the guy, he cheers to John. And so John looks at him and says, well, thank you, but
what's this gonna cost me?
We'd love a minute of your time.
And John Varvatos says, come to my studio tomorrow. Seeing that moment in the show made me think this is something I need to be doing in my life more. These acts of courage, these moments where you take that risk where it might end with you getting punched in the face, or maybe, just maybe, it gets you that contact, that meeting, that move that propels your career forward, your ambitions forward. These are things that men just don't do as much as they used to. Because sidelining yourself from the acts of courage that will help you, it's gotten easier. And so you have to sort of strike out, rebel against the temptations that prevent you from doing the acts of courage you need to be doing. The final point I want to make in this video is a little bit of a left turn, but I do think it makes a big difference. And that's hygiene. 90% of men maybe don't take their grooming, their fashion, their hygiene at a level they should. It doesn't take much. I mean, the first place to start is to make sure there's nothing up your nose and nothing in your teeth. But a quick way I've noticed this is that this year I've just started getting more consistent haircuts. And I feel it's made a huge difference in my appearance. And not even just appearance, but overall sense of like presentation, just feeling on point. Whereas in the years past, I would often let long spells of time go between haircuts, and I just started looking a little bit frumpy and not feeling quite as sharp and polished. This even extends to the way my personal space looks. When I take the effort to organize my house, my email, the car, just make sure that everything is in its right place, and if something doesn't have a place, if I don't need it anymore, that it gets thrown out, it gets trashed. Doing these things to just get yourself on point in the life you have, both with your appearance and your environment, it all adds up. And when you see a lot of guys walking around, they look kind of frumpy out on the streets, and you have to ask yourself, like, why? You don't need to break the bank to look sharp. Wheat Waffles, who's a YouTuber I actually paid to rate my attractiveness, he has a great video about all these small things that men allow to do, both with their grooming and their appearance, that just like artificially drops points to them. These are things like having bad breath, having a haircut that doesn't fit you. A big thing that he mentions is having like too high of a body fat percentage, because your body fat like directly affects how lean and good your face looks. You don't need to go overboard with this, but taking some interest in your appearance, and maybe when you get to a point where you have the funds to invest in things like a skincare routine, these things do add up. And if you were to follow through on all of these elements, it ends up being those marginal gains where you're someone who takes their fitness seriously, you're someone who does deep work, your hygiene is on point, and unlike most men, you exercise acts of courage all the time. Basically what it means is you can start from anywhere and get yourself to a point where you just stand out. Now, on the note of deep work, this video is sponsored by Shortform. Shortform is a book summary platform that I use every day. One of the most important ways that I have to exercise deep work is reading and writing. In fact, if you yourself want to be a great YouTuber, actually the job you're signing up for is to be a writer. And so I'm constantly ingesting new ideas and trying to write scripts based off of them and then come up with my own analysis. And so I read books. Sometimes the books I read are really dense. Like currently I'm revisiting a lot of the works of Ray Dalio, and it feels daunting to start a new book. So I see if Shortform has a summary of the book on their platform, and their summaries, compared to other book summary platforms, they're really, really rigorous. Like they put a lot of thought into each summary. You can just have a one-page summary if you want an overview of the book at large, but also they break it down by chapter. If the author of a certain book is asking you to consider an idea and like maybe process it for yourself, or maybe they pose a question, what Shortform will often do is put the question at a certain segment of their summary and then leave space, and you can actually like do your own journaling prompts to the question based on the book on Shortform's platform. So it's way more rigorous than, you know, I don't want to say their names, but compared to other book summaries, this is way more in depth. And as someone who has to read and write, and honestly just to better myself, I constantly have to take in new ideas. You know, it's one of the most high ROI forms of deep work. Shortform has been a really great tool in this regard. If you yourself want to try out the platform, you can go to my link in the description box. That's shortform.com/Captain Sinbad. You'll get a 5-day free trial, and if you sign on for their annual subscription, you'll get 20% off of that. Thank you, Shortform, for sponsoring this video. On with the rest of it. Now, maybe you can't be like the ultimate Chad ever, but you can definitely get yourself to a point where you make an impression, where you're an impressive person. You're someone who stands out and can take a lot of pride in what they've done and the body they've built, because most guys just aren't doing it. If you're new to the channel, my name is Nikhil. This channel is a combination of filmmaking endeavors, comedy sketches, lifestyle challenges, and as it seems, getting more and more into like this red pill alpha male YouTube manosphere channel, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about, but I think it's also just an authentic representation of where I'm at in life right now and the things I'm thinking about, so we're running with it. If any of these topics appeal to you, consider subscribing. If you'd like to connect with me further, you can find me on Instagram. I put up one reel and one post a week, trying to offer some kind of value in the department of fitness and productivity. And lastly, if you're interested, you can check out my newsletter, where I put in weekly mini essays or posts about what I've been thinking about lately, both in terms of like cinematography and just like life, like the things on my mind. But with that being said, for those of us who are willing to take on the endeavors that separate us from the pack, to us I say greatness is coming. See you guys next time.